All right, welcome back to Module 7. We're going to talk about Module 7 is slicers. This is something that you may or may not have heard of in Excel. It's a pretty cool tool that you can use to create some fairly simple dashboards, but things that are definitely presentable and things that you can pass on to others to allow them to do some data analysis and data mining on their own. So we're going to walk through how to create slicers, how to manipulate them, their uses, and then building a dashboard using slicers. So the first thing we need to do in order to create slicers is we need to create a pivot table. And you can reference back to Module 5 on how to create a pivot table. So I'm going to go through that fairly quickly right now, but we'll explain what I'm doing as I go. So I'm going to select all of our data, and in order to do that, I'm going to do Control-Shift right arrow, and then Control-Shift down arrow to select all of our data. I'm going to go to Insert, Pivot Table, and it's already selected our range. We want to put it in a new worksheet, so we're going to hit OK. All right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring in, just like we did before, I'm going to bring an ID number into values, and I'm going to change that using field value settings from sum to count, and hit OK. There's our 500 employees that you can see there. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back to our original data. It's already highlighted still, and I'm going to insert another pivot table in that same sheet. So I'm going to go to Insert, Pivot Table, same thing. Instead of New Worksheet, I'm going to say Existing Worksheet. I'm going to click the arrow and then click into Sheet 12, and I'm going to put it right about here just to give us a little bit of room. And there's our second pivot table. But instead of using count of ID number, what I'm going to use is, let's see here, let's do age as our values. And it's going to do sum of age again, as we discussed before in the other module. So we're going to do count, and there's our 500 again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drag age into our rows. And you can see all the different ages of our employees here. And I'm going to drag in gender into our rows on this pivot table. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some slicers that will allow us to manipulate this data very easily. It's very easy to do, so you just need to click on the pivot table and say Insert Slicer. It will bring up all of the different values that we have. So let's do one. We're going to do one for gender. We're going to do one for work country, and one for, I don't know, job title, let's say. We're going to hit OK, and it's going to bring up 3 different slicers that we can use. And now these slicers, hopefully you're beginning to see how we can start to create a dashboard here. But these slicers are now, we are able to use them to manipulate our data. So if we click on female, you can see this pivot table changes just to females. If we click on male, same thing. This is the clear button, so we're going to clear our filter and we get back to our 500. If you select this button up at the top, it's a multi-select button. It means that you can select multiple things at once. So I recommend turning those on. One thing you don't notice, or that you wouldn't see, is that when we click on these buttons, actually we're going to turn these off for now. When we click on these buttons, the bottom pivot table doesn't change. And that's because we have changed we have created these slicers based on this pivot table. So what we need to do is we need to connect these slicers to this second pivot table, which is really easy to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the slicer, we're going to right click, and we're going to go to Report Connections, and see how it says Pivot Table 7 in Sheet 12. We're going to connect it with Pivot Table 8 as well, and hit OK. We're going to do the same thing, right click, Report Connections, Pivot Table 8, and right click, Report Connections, Pivot Table 8. Now, when we change our slicers here, you can see that bottom pivot table changes as well. Pretty cool, right? So it's a way to manipulate data and select multiple things. So if we want to look at the females in Germany who are senior engineers, we see that there are 7 of them, and they range from age 41 to 56. Well, this is all fine and good. We're going to clear these filters so that we have all of our data. So we have 500. This is all fine and good, but what we really want to do is create a dashboard something that people can look at and use to manipulate these data on their own. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to click on this pivot table and say Insert, Pivot Chart. And we're going to go, for this one, we're just going to do a clustered column chart. That's fine. And we're going to put that right over top of that pivot table. We're going to move these just here to the top. And just like that. So now, when we click on these females in, let's say, Brazil, who are engineer 3s, we now see that there's one of them, right? And so you can play around with the data. You can play around with what you want to select. Let's go United States, chief engineers who are females, engineer 3s, etc., etc. And you can see this other pivot table moving around as well behind the scenes. So what we're going to do is we are going to, because this is age, we're going to click on this pivot table. And we're going to say Insert and Pivot Chart. And we're going to do a line chart just like that. And we're going to bring this down to here. So I'm going to zoom out as well so we can see this stuff a little bit better. Oh, let's do one more. There we go. So what we can do now is, and let's get rid of, let's see, maybe we stack these to make them look a little bit better. And just align those there. So, and maybe we'll get rid of our grid lines. So if we go to View and Grid Lines, get rid of those. Now what we have is a pretty cool little dashboard that looks at, and let's rename this. So this is female versus male count, and this is, what did we say this was? Age. So now I'm going to get rid of this. Now we can play around with these different fields, and we have a bit of a dashboard. So if we only want to look at the males, now we're looking at the age count for only the males. If we want to look at the females, we can look at the age count only for the females. We can clear the filter and go back to the regular, all of our data. We can see that we are totaled at 500 there. So let's say we want to look at the female population in, I don't know, let's say Poland, who are engineer 1s. It looks like there's 0. Engineer 2s, there we go. Looks like there's more of them there. So we can see kind of the age count and how they shake out there. Engineer 3s, looks like there's 1 across each of the groups there. So in the United States, engineer 3s who are female, if we go to male, we can see that there are more options to choose from in our data. But just an easy way to kind of look at data in a quick and simple manner. Again, you can use the same formatting that we talked about in the last module, charts and graphs, to format your charts and graphs here as well. Keep in mind that you do have to set up a pivot table first, and that pivot table we talked about in module 5 on how to create those pivot tables. But those are slicers. Again, easy way to look at data, nice way to kind of pass data along to somebody who might not be as familiar with pivot tables, where they can just click and select and look at various data points as well. I think my main piece of advice here is to try and keep it simple. Don't put too many slicers in, because that gets pretty confusing and people forget what they could click on and all those kinds of things. But if you do keep it simple, it's a nice way to look at data. So happy slicing, and we'll see you in the next module.